Princess Zara had always been different from other members of her royal family. While her sisters spent their days learning about politics and trade agreements, she preferred sitting in the ancient meditation gardens, practicing the breathing. Techniques that had been passed down through generations of her people. Her grandmother, the wise Queen Mother, had taught her these special methods when she was just a young girl. "Remember, my dear," her grandmother used to say, "our emotions are like fire. They can warm us or burn everything down. The choice is always ours." Zara's skin would change colors based on how she felt, just like all members of her species. When she was calm and peaceful, her skin glowed with a soft purple light. When she got excited or happy, it would shift to bright blue. But when she was scared or angry, it turned red, and that's when things got dangerous. Her people had special abilities that connected to their emotions, and if someone lost control completely, they could accidentally hurt others around them. That's why the breathing techniques were so important. They helped her stay balanced and in control, no matter what was happening around her. She had practiced these methods for years, becoming one of the best in her entire kingdom at staying calm under pressure. Today, she was on a mission to explore an old abandoned area on a distant moon. Her job was to check if the place was safe and see if there were any useful resources left behind. The moon had been the site of a big conflict years ago, and now it was mostly empty ruins and broken buildings. As she walked through the empty streets, Zara felt a strange sense of sadness. The buildings must have been beautiful once, with their tall towers and elegant designs. Now they were just empty shells, covered in dust and debris. She could imagine families living here, children playing in the courtyards, people going about their daily lives. It made her heart heavy to think about how war had changed everything. She was using a small device to scan the area when it suddenly beeped, indicating that there was movement nearby. Zara's heart started beating faster immediately. She wasn't supposed to encounter anyone here. The reports had said this place was completely deserted. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her hand against the special crystal pendant that hung around her neck. The crystal was a family heirloom, passed down from her grandmother. It wasn't magic, but it helped her focus when she needed to use her breathing techniques. The smooth, cool surface always reminded her of her grandmother's gentle voice and wise words. She began the first breathing pattern her grandmother had taught her. It was simple, but effective. Breathe in slowly for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, then breathe out for 4 counts. As she did this, she felt her heartbeat start to slow down a little. Her skin, which had been shifting toward an anxious orange color, began to return to its normal purple shade. Through a gap in a broken wall, she saw a figure moving carefully through the ruins. It was definitely not one of her people. The figure was taller than anyone from her species, and it moved in a way that seemed very deliberate and cautious. As it came closer, she realized it was wearing some kind of uniform that she didn't recognize. Then she saw the face, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a human. She had studied humans in her diplomatic training, but she had never seen one in person before. They were supposed to be far away from this part of the galaxy, involved in their own conflicts in distant star systems. The human looked tired and worn, like someone who had been through many difficult experiences. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and worry. His clothes were damaged and patched in several places, and he carried himself with the careful alertness of someone who had learned to expect danger at any moment. When their eyes met, Zara felt a jolt of fear shoot through her body. Her skin immediately began changing to a bright red color, and she could feel the dangerous energy building up inside her. This was exactly what her grandmother had warned her about. When her people got too scared or upset, they could lose control of their special abilities and accidentally release powerful bursts of energy that could hurt or even destroy everything around them. The human had stopped moving and was staring at her with wide eyes. She could see that he was just as surprised and frightened as she was. His hand moved toward something at his side, probably a weapon, but he didn't draw it. That small gesture gave her a tiny bit of hope. Zara knew she had to act fast. The red color of her skin was getting brighter, which meant she was getting closer to losing control. She pressed both hands against her crystal pendant and forced herself to focus on the second breathing pattern her grandmother had taught her. This one was more complex. Breathe in for 6 counts, hold for 2, breathe out for 8 counts, then pause for 2 counts before starting again, as she concentrated on the breathing rhythm. She tried to push away all the frightening thoughts that were racing through her mind. She thought about her grandmother's garden, with its peaceful fountains and gentle breezes. She remembered the feeling of sitting there on quiet afternoons, watching the sunset paint the sky in beautiful colors. Slowly, very slowly, her skin began to change from red back toward purple. The dangerous energy that had been building inside her started to calm down. She could feel her heartbeat becoming more regular, and her thoughts became clearer. The human was still watching her. She noticed that he seemed to be breathing more slowly, too. Maybe he had his own ways of dealing with fear and stress. She realized that despite being from completely different worlds, they might not be so different after all. Both of them were alone in this empty place. Both of them were scared, and both of them were trying to survive. As her skin settled into a calmer lavender shade, Zara felt a new emotion rising in her chest. It wasn't fear anymore, but something closer to curiosity. This unexpected meeting might be frightening, but it was also the most interesting thing that had happened to her in a long time. Perhaps if she could keep her emotions under control, she might learn something valuable from this strange encounter. The human seemed to sense her change in mood. His posture relaxed slightly, and his hand moved away from his weapon. They stood there in the ruins, 2 beings from different worlds, both trying to figure out what to do next. The air between them was thick with tension, but also with possibility. Zara continued her breathing exercises, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether this encounter would end in violence or perhaps something entirely unexpected. The human soldier had been alone on this forgotten moon for what felt like forever. His name was Jake, and he had been part of a team sent to evacuate important equipment before the enemy forces arrived. But things had gone wrong, as they often did in war. Their transport ship had been hit by enemy fire just as they were trying to leave, and Jake had watched helplessly as his friends were either taken away or lost in the chaos. For 3 long months, he'd been moving from place to place, hiding in the ruins of what used to be a thriving human settlement. He had learned to sleep with one eye open, to move quietly through the shadows, and to make every piece of food and water last as long as possible. His military training had prepared him for survival situations, but nothing could have prepared him for the loneliness that came with being the only human left on an entire world. He had seen the alien ships flying overhead many times, sleek designs cutting through the sky like silver birds. Sometimes they would land and search through the ruins, looking for survivors or useful technology. Jake had always managed to stay hidden, watching from dark corners and underground tunnels as the aliens did their work. He had never gotten close, enough to see one of them clearly. Until now, the alien princess stood just a few meters away from him, and Jake couldn't help but stare. She was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Skin seemed to glow with its own inner light, shifting through different colors like a living rainbow. Right now, it was a deep red color that somehow made him feel nervous. Even though he didn't understand why, she was smaller than he had expected, maybe the same height as an average human woman. But there was something about the way she carried herself that spoke of nobility and grace. Her clothes were made from materials that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and around her neck hung a beautiful crystal that caught and reflected the light in amazing ways. Jake's hand had automatically moved toward his weapon when he first saw her, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she seemed just as surprised to see him as he was to see her. Or maybe it was how she didn't immediately attack or call for help. Instead, she seemed to be doing something strange with her breathing, like she was trying to calm herself down. His own military training had taught him breathing techniques for managing stress and fear in combat situations. When you're in the middle of a fight, when bullets are flying and explosions are going off all around you, sometimes the only thing that keeps you sane is remembering to breathe properly. Jake had used these techniques countless times during his years of service, and he recognized the signs of someone trying to get control of their emotions. As he watched, The alien's skin began to change from red to a lighter color, more like purple or lavender. The change was gradual, like watching a sunset in reverse. He found himself fascinated by the process, wondering if the colors somehow reflected her emotional state. If that was true, then the red color had probably meant she was scared or angry, and the purple meant she was getting calmer. Without really thinking about it, Jake began to slow his own breathing. He had been taking quick, shallow breaths ever since he spotted her, which was his body's natural response to a potentially dangerous situation. But now he started using the 4-count breathing pattern his drill sergeant had taught him years ago. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, then repeat. As he did this, he felt some of the tension leaving his shoulders and neck. His heartbeat, which had been racing like a drum in his chest, began to slow down to a more normal rhythm. He realized that he hadn't felt this calm in months, not since before the evacuation went wrong, and he found himself stranded here. The alien princess seemed to notice his change in breathing. Her large eyes, which were a striking shade of silver, focused on him with what looked like curiosity rather than fear. She tilted her head slightly as if she was studying him, trying to figure out what he was doing. Jake had encountered many different alien species during his time in the military, but none of them had ever looked at him the way this one was looking at him now. Most aliens either saw humans as enemies to be defeated or as primitive creatures to be ignored, but this one seemed to be seeing him as an individual, someone worth understanding. He noticed that her breathing had become very regular and controlled, almost like a meditation technique. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm she was using, and Jake found himself unconsciously trying to match it. His own breathing naturally adjusted to follow her pattern, and he was surprised by how much more relaxed it made him feel. Princess raised one hand and placed it over her heart, then moved it in a slow, graceful gesture that seemed to encompass the space between them. Jake didn't understand the meaning of the gesture, but something about it felt peaceful and non-threatening. He responded by slowly moving his hand away from his weapon and holding it up with his palm facing her. The universal human gesture for "I mean no harm." The effect was immediate. The alien's skin brightened to a softer shade of purple, and what might have been a smile appeared on her face. It was strange to see expressions that were both alien and somehow familiar at the same time. They stood there for several minutes, neither of them moving, both of them breathing in the same steady rhythm. Jake felt a sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in months. The constant worry about survival, the fear of being discovered, the sadness of being alone, all of it seemed to fade into the background. He realized that this alien princess was somehow helping him feel calm, though he couldn't understand how. Maybe it was just the fact that she wasn't trying to hurt him, or maybe there was something more to it. Either way, he was grateful for this unexpected moment of peace in what had been a very difficult few months, as they continued to stand there in perfect stillness. Jake began to think that maybe, just maybe, this encounter didn't have to end badly. Perhaps they could find a way to communicate, to understand each other, even though they came from completely different worlds. The thought filled him with something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Time seemed to move differently as Jake and Princess Zara stood facing each other in the ruins. What might have been minutes felt like hours, and yet somehow it also felt like no time at all. The broken walls around them created a natural shelter from the wind. The only sounds were there: synchronized breathing and the distant whisper of air moving through the abandoned buildings. Jake had never experienced anything quite like this before. In his military career, he had been trained to read people quickly, to assess threats, and make split-second decisions. But this situation was completely different. There was no threat assessment protocol for standing peacefully with an alien. Princess, while practicing breathing exercises together, he watched as Zara's skin continued to shift through subtle shades of purple and blue. The changes were so gradual that he almost didn't notice them at first, but after a while, he began to see the patterns. When she breathed in deeply, her skin would brighten slightly. When she exhaled, it would soften to a more muted tone. It was like watching a living mood ring, but far more beautiful and complex. Zara, for her part, was fascinated by the human's ability to adapt to her breathing rhythm. She had been taught that most species couldn't understand or replicate the advanced breathing techniques of her people, but Jake seemed to be learning them naturally. His chest rose and fell in perfect timing with her own, and she could sense that his emotional state was becoming more stable and peaceful. She decided to try something she had never attempted before. In her royal training, she had learned about the fourth level of breathing techniques, which were supposed to help project calm feelings to others nearby. It was considered very advanced, and she had only practiced it a few times under careful supervision. But something about this situation made her want to try it. Very slowly, she began to adjust her breathing pattern. Instead of the simple rhythm she had been using, she started incorporating longer pauses between inhales and exhales. She focused on imagining waves of peace flowing out from her body. Like ripples spreading across a calm lake, Jake felt the change immediately, though he couldn't explain what was happening. A warm, gentle feeling seemed to wash over him, starting from his chest and spreading outward to his arms and legs. It was like being wrapped in a soft blanket on a cold day, or sitting by a fireplace after coming in from the rain. A constant tension that had been his companion for 3 months began to melt away, for the first time since the evacuation disaster. Jake felt truly relaxed. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, and his hands, which had been constantly ready to grab weapons or tools, simply hung naturally at his sides. It was such a relief that he almost wanted to cry. He looked at Zara with new understanding. She wasn't just managing her own emotions. She was somehow helping him manage his too. The realization filled him with wonder and gratitude. There was someone from a completely different world, someone who should have been his enemy according to the war that was raging across the galaxy, and yet she was using her abilities to help him feel peace. Zara noticed the change in Jake's posture and expression, and her skin brightened to a warm golden color. She had succeeded in projecting calm to another being, something that usually took years of practice to master. But more than that, she had helped someone who clearly needed it. The human had been carrying so much stress and fear, and now he looked younger, more relaxed, almost like a different person. She decided to try communicating with him using gestures. Very slowly, she raised both hands and placed them flat against her chest, then moved them outward in a flowing motion. It was a traditional greeting from her world, meaning, "I offer you peace from my heart to yours." Jake didn't understand the specific meaning of the gesture, but he could sense its peaceful intent. He responded by placing his own hand over his heart and nodding slightly, hoping to convey respect and acceptance. Encouraged by this success, Zara tried another gesture. She pointed to herself, then to him, then made a motion with her hands that seemed to encompass the space around them. Jake thought she might be asking about the area, or perhaps suggesting that they were both in the same situation. He nodded again and pointed to the ruins around them, and made a sweeping gesture toward the horizon. He was trying to tell her that this place had been abandoned, that they were alone here, as she seemed to understand, because her expression became more thoughtful. They continued this silent conversation for a while, using hand gestures, facial expressions, and body language. To share basic information, Jake pointed to his damaged uniform and made a gesture that he hoped would convey that he had been stranded here. Zara pointed to her scanning device and then to the buildings, indicating that she had been exploring. As they communicated, Jake began to notice other things about the alien princess. She moved with incredible grace, like a dancer who was always aware of where every part of her body was positioned. Her large silver eyes were extremely expressive, and he found that he could read her emotions almost as easily as he could read the color changes in her skin. There was something else too, an intelligence and kindness in her expression that reminded him of his own sister back home. Despite all the physical differences, there was something fundamentally recognizable about her. She was curious about him, cautious but not afraid, and genuinely interested in peaceful communication. Zara was having similar thoughts about Jake. Beneath the tired, worn exterior, she could see someone who was basically good-hearted. He could have drawn his weapon when he first saw her, but he had chosen not to. He was following her lead in their peaceful interaction, and she sensed that he was someone who preferred solving problems through understanding rather than violence. The two of them settled into a comfortable rhythm of silent communication, sharing the basics of their situations through gestures and expressions. As they did, both of them began to realize that this unexpected meeting might be the most important thing that had happened to either of them in a very long time. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ruins and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In this peaceful moment, with the war seeming very far away, Jake and Zara had found something rare and precious, a connection that transcended species, language, and the conflicts that had brought them to this forgotten place. The peaceful moment between Jake and Princess Zara was shattered by a sound that made both of their hearts skip a beat. A low, rumbling noise echoed across the empty landscape, growing louder with each passing second. Jake recognized it immediately, the distinctive hum of military aircraft engines. But these weren't human ships. Zara's skin instantly shifted from its calm golden color to a bright orange, the color of worry and quick thinking. She looked up at the sky, and Jake followed her gaze to see 3 sleek alien vessels approaching from the east. They were flying in a standard search pattern, which meant they were looking for something or someone. Jake felt his stomach drop. After 3 months of successfully avoiding detection, he was about to be discovered. But it wasn't just his own safety he was worried about now. If those ships found Zara talking to him, she could be in serious trouble too. From what he understood about military protocols, fraternizing with the enemy was usually considered a serious offense. No matter which side you were on, Zara was having the same thoughts. Her people had strict rules about contact with humans during wartime. If the patrol ships discovered her here with Jake, they would assume she had been captured, or that she was sharing military secrets. Either way, the consequences would be severe, not just for her, but for Jake as well. The ships were getting closer, and Jake could see their scanning lights sweeping across the ruins. It may be 2 minutes before the ships would be close enough to detect them. He looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, his military training kicking in automatically. That's when Zara did something that surprised him completely. Instead of running away or calling out to the ships, she grabbed his arm and pointed toward a collapsed section of building that had created a natural tunnel leading underground. Her meaning was clear. She wanted them to hide together. Jake hesitated for just a moment. This could be a trap. Maybe she was planning to turn him in to gain favor with her own people. But when he looked into her silver eyes, he saw only genuine concern and determination. She was willing to risk her own safety to protect him. Even though they had just met, without another word, Jake nodded and followed her toward the tunnel entrance. As they moved, Zara continued her advanced breathing techniques. But now Jake could see that it was taking much more effort than before. Her skin was flickering between orange and red, showing that she was struggling to maintain control of her emotions under the pressure. The tunnel entrance was partially blocked by fallen debris, but there was just enough space for them to squeeze through. Jake went first, using his strength to move some of the smaller rocks out of the way. Zara followed close behind, her glowing skin providing a soft light in the darkness. They crawled through the tunnel for what felt like forever, the sound of the aircraft engines growing louder above them. Finally, they reached a larger chamber that had once been the basement of some kind of building. It was dark and dusty, but it felt safe and hidden. Jake and Zara crouched in the shadows, listening to the sounds from above. The ships had landed, and they could hear the heavy footsteps of search teams moving through the ruins. Voices called out in the alien language, giving orders and reporting back to their commanders. Zara closed her eyes and began the most advanced breathing technique she knew. It was dangerous to attempt without proper preparation, but she knew it was the only way to keep both of them safe. She needed to achieve perfect emotional control, not just for herself, but to help Jake stay calm too. Jake watched in amazement as her skin began to change to a deep blue color he had never seen before. It was beautiful and somehow comforting, like looking at a clear night sky. As the color stabilized, he felt that same warm, peaceful feeling wash over him again. But this time, it was much stronger. The calming effect was incredible. Even though they were hiding from search teams that could discover them at any moment, Jake found himself breathing slowly and evenly. His heart rate was steady, and his mind was clear. He realized that Zara was using her abilities to help mask their presence, somehow making them less likely to be detected. For 6 long hours, they remained hidden in that dark chamber. Search. Teams moved through the ruins above them, their footsteps echoing through the broken buildings. Several times, Jake was sure they would be discovered. Once, a searcher walked directly over their hiding spot, close enough that dust fell from the ceiling onto their heads. But Zara never wavered. She maintained her breathing technique throughout the entire ordeal, her skin staying that deep, calming blue. Jake found himself naturally matching her rhythm, and together they created a pocket of perfect stillness in the middle of chaos. During those long hours, Jake learned something important about the alien princess. She wasn't just brave, she was incredibly strong, both mentally and emotionally. The breathing technique she was using was clearly exhausting her, but she never stopped. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her hands trembled slightly from the effort. But she kept going because she knew their lives depended on it. Jake also discovered something about himself. He had always thought he was pretty good at staying calm under pressure, but this was something entirely different. With Zara's help, he was able to achieve a level of mental clarity and emotional control that he had never experienced before. It was like finding a superpower he never knew he had. As the hours passed, the search teams gradually moved further away from their hiding spot. The voices became fainter, and the footsteps less frequent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they heard the sound of the ship starting up their engines again. Jake and Zara waited in silence until the rumbling of the aircraft faded completely into the distance. Only then did Zara allow herself to relax, her skin slowly shifting back to its normal purple color. She was exhausted from the effort, but there was something else in her expression too, a sense of accomplishment and relief. They had done it. They had survived their first real test together, and in doing so, they had proven something important to each other. They could trust each other, even when their lives were at stake. That trust would change everything for both of them. When the last sounds of the search ships finally faded into the distance, Jake and Princess Zara remained in their underground hideout for another hour, just to be absolutely sure it was safe. The silence that followed felt almost as intense as the danger they had just escaped. Both of them were exhausted, but it was a different kind of tiredness than either had experienced before. Zara's skin had returned to its normal purple shade, but Jake could see that maintaining those advanced breathing techniques for so long had taken a serious toll on her. Her hands were still shaking slightly, and there were dark circles under her silver eyes. Yet there was also something new in her expression, a quiet pride and confidence that hadn't been there before. For Jake, the experience had been life-changing in ways he was only beginning to understand. The breathing techniques that Zara had shared with him weren't just useful for staying calm in dangerous situations. They had given him a sense of inner peace that he had never known was possible. The constant anxiety and stress that had been his companions for months were gone, replaced by a feeling of centeredness and clarity. When they finally emerged from the tunnel, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The ruins looked different in the morning light, less threatening and more peaceful. It was as if the night they had spent together had changed not just their relationship with each other, but their relationship with the world. Around them, they stood once again in the same spot where they had first encountered each other.
Ow.
But everything was different now. The fear and uncertainty that had marked their initial meeting had been replaced by something much deeper. A mutual respect and understanding that transcended the differences between their species. Jake looked at Zara and realized that he felt more connected to this alien princess than he had to most of the humans he had served with during his military career. She had risked her own safety to protect him, and together they had survived something that neither could have faced alone. Zara was having similar thoughts. In her royal training, she had learned about many different species and cultures, but all of that education paled in comparison to what she had learned about humans by spending one night with Jake. He was brave, loyal, and capable of achieving the same kind of emotional balance that her own people prized so highly. They began to communicate again using the gesture language they had developed the day before. But now their conversation was much more complex. Jake pointed to himself, then to the horizon, trying to explain that he needed to find a way off this moon. Zara nodded in understanding, then pointed to her scanning device and made a series of gestures that seemed to indicate she could help. Using her equipment, Zara showed Jake a map of the local area. She pointed to a location about 50 kilometers away and made gestures that suggested it was some kind of transportation hub. Jake studied the map carefully, recognizing it as an old human spaceport that had been abandoned during the evacuation. But Zara had more to offer than just directions. She spent several minutes working with her device, and Jake realized she was sending some kind of signal. When she finished, she turned to him with what he had learned to recognize as her happy expression, skin shifting to a warm blue color and her eyes brightening. Through gestures, she managed to communicate that she had contacted a neutral space station that helped refugees and displaced people from both sides of the conflict. They would send a ship to pick Jake up, but it would take them a day to arrive. Until then, she would help him reach the spaceport safely. The generosity of her offer overwhelmed Jake. Not only was she helping him escape, but she was doing it in a way that would keep him safe from both armies. The neutral station would give him a chance to start over somewhere far from the war, somewhere he could build a new life in peace. As they prepared to begin the journey to the spaceport, both Jake and Zara realized that their time together was coming to an end. The thought made them both sad, but they also knew that what they had shared would stay with them forever. Zara reached up, carefully removed the crystal pendant from around her neck. Jake had watched her use this pendant throughout their time. Together, pressing it against her skin whenever she needed to focus on her breathing techniques, he understood that it was something very important to her. It's probably a family heirloom passed down through generations. She held the pendant out to him, and when he hesitated to take such a precious gift, she pressed it gently into his hands, through gestures. She managed to explain that the crystal would help him continue practicing the breathing techniques she had taught him. It would be a way for him to carry a piece of their friendship with him wherever he went. In return, Jake removed his own most treasured possession, a small metal tag that soldiers wore to identify themselves. It wasn't valuable in terms of money, but it represented his years of service, his loyalty to his friends, and his commitment to protecting others. He placed it carefully in Zara's hands, hoping she would understand that it was his way of saying thank you for everything she had done. They spent the rest of the day walking toward the spaceport, sharing their knowledge and helping each other navigate the challenging terrain. Zara showed Jake where to find fresh water and edible plants, while Jake used his survival skills to help them avoid the automated defense systems that were still scattered throughout the area as they walked. They continued to practice the breathing techniques together. Jake was getting better at the more advanced patterns, and he found that he could actually sense Zara's emotional state when she projected calm feelings. It was like learning a completely new way of communicating, one that went deeper than words ever could. When the rescue ship finally arrived at the spaceport the next day, both Jake and Zara knew their time together was over. But they also knew that they had given each other something incredible, a new understanding of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear. As Jake boarded the ship that would take him to safety, he looked back at Zara one last time. She was standing in the morning sunlight, her skin glowing with that peaceful purple color, her hand raised in farewell. In his pocket, he could feel the weight of her crystal pendant, and he knew that wherever life took him next, he would never forget the alien princess who had taught him how to find peace in the middle of chaos. Zara watched until the ship disappeared into the sky, then began her own journey home. In her hand, she held Jake's identification tag, a small piece of metal that represented something much larger, proof that even in the darkest times, it was possible for two beings to choose friendship over fear, understanding over hatred. The war continued to rage across the galaxy, but in one small corner of the universe, two people had proven that there was always another choice. They had shown that peace was possible, one breath at a time, one moment of understanding at a time, and that lesson would stay with them for the rest of their lives.